Okay, so in the previous class, if you remember, we were discussing about various trip purposes. So I had told you that there are plenty of purposes for which people start their trip or make their trip. Normally, it would be very difficult for us, that is the transport planners, to consider each and every person's individual trip purpose. So what the planners have done is they have tried to generalize to minimize the complications during the planning process. They have tried to generalize the trip making purposes into major categories. So some of the important classes of trip purpose would be like work or for education or for business or for recreation purpose or many other important purposes or emergencies, right? So I had told you that among all the trips, around 80 to 90% of the total trips are home based, right? So most of the trips that some people make would be starting from their home or ending at their home. So that's why majority of the trips, when we try to consider, they would be home based trips. So 80 to 90% of the trips that people make are home based. Okay, so what this means is, again, see, step by step what we are doing here is we are trying to minimize our complications of understanding the present situation of an area when the planning process is being started. Okay, so planning process, as I said, it is a very complicated process, and we'll have to be very clear in assuming certain things such that our complications will be less when the planning is supposed to be done. Okay, so this is one such assumption what we normally make, assumption that around 80 to 90% of the total trips what people make are home based trips. Okay, now there are certain factors which govern the trip generation and attraction rate. Okay, see, these generations and attractions, they are influenced by plenty of factors, many factors. Like for example, you would want to, there's nothing in your home to eat, you are alone in your home, your parents or your family has gone out of station and you are alone in your home. In case if you are hungry, you would want to go to some nearest grocery shop and buy something and come back to your home and sit and eat. Okay, so the purpose here is your hunger. You would want to eat. Okay, so eating is the purpose, but you have nothing in your home. Okay, so when you don't have anything in your home to eat, but you still have some money in your pocket, you would expect or you would decide to go to the nearest shop or hotel and bring something to eat and come back to your home. Okay, so here the factor which is driving you to make the trip, okay, is your money. In case if you are not having a single penny in your pocket, you would try to adjust yourself in deciding to have anything that is available in your home. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is, if you have money, if you have sufficient money, you would decide to go out and bring something exciting for you to eat, right? So this factor that made you to generate trip is money. Okay, and the purpose is eating. Hunger is the purpose and money is the factor which is influencing you to generate a trip. So there are many such factors which influences the trip generation and attraction rates in a area. It depends upon the land use pattern, depends upon the class of people or the financial condition of the people who are residing in the area, and also the travel conditions and the facilities available in the region. So there are many such factors which we are going to discuss here. So I have listed some of the important factors which governs the trip generation and attraction rate. Okay, So the first and the most important factor that governs the trip generation and attraction rates in an area is income. So income plays a very important role, right? So what this means is, when the income is high, there would be high chances for people to generate trips or trip rates. Okay, so the trip generation rate would be high in cases where people have more income or sufficient income. I don't say just more income or higher income. If you have sufficient income, then the chances of you generating trips would be more. Okay, so you might have seen people when they get their salary during the first week of the month, they would be having a tendency to go out and spend the money with their family for recreational purpose or for enjoyment or for any other such things. Okay, so what this means is, as and when the income rate of the people starts increasing in the region, there will be more chances of people generating trips. When the income is less, they would be self-sufficient with them, with their available facilities, and they would try to spend good time within the home itself or somewhere around the home itself. Okay, so this is how income plays an important role in governing trip generation and attraction rate. Next is car ownership, or I would like to name it as vehicular ownership. Now, more the number of vehicles that people use, more would be the chances of trips getting generated. If you don't have a vehicle with you, then you definitely would not want to go 20 or 30 kilometers away from your house and spend some time with your friends. You would be doing it, but not very oftenly. But in case if you have a vehicle with you, your own personal vehicle with you, then there would be more chances of you taking your vehicle and just going out for a leisure ride within the city, meeting your friends or family or spending some time watching movie, etc., etc., right? So vehicle ownership again influences the number of trips getting generated in a region. So always remember that more the number of vehicles owned by the people in a household, there will be more chances of trips getting generated. Okay, so the third factor which influences the trip generation and attraction rate would be family size and composition. When you have your household, we normally call it as household in transport planning terminologies. So when you are residing in a household where you have a huge family, a joint family, there are 7 to 8 people residing in that house, and there are 4 to 5 vehicles in the house, and among all these 7 people, around 5 people are working adults. So when there are 5 people who are working in a house of 7 people, right, then all these 5 people would be generating their trips from a single household. So there would be 7 number of trips taking place every day in the beginning of the day, right? So that's a huge contribution, or that's a huge involvement of that particular household in generation of the trip, which gets into account, right? So family size and composition plays a very important role when we are doing transport planning, or when we are planning for transportation facility. So what it generally concludes here is, bigger the family, more will be the chances of trips getting generated from that family or from that house or from that household, right? So this is about family size and composition. Next is land use characteristics. The way with which the land is being used in that region where the planning is supposed to be done influences the trip generation and attraction rate. If you had a village, or if you have a very small town, or if you have a very small this thing very small region, then the land use pattern would not be much influential on the traffic congestions and transport facilities, because it's a small region. You might have seen there are villages and there are towns in our state. When you go there, you will be having a very small marketplace. You will be having very limited volume of traffic. You will be having very limited population of people. But when it comes to a bigger scale like Bangalore city, a metropolitan city, then land use and its influence on the trips getting generated would be greatly influenced. Okay, so for a city like Bangalore, the way in which you are going to place the various facilities for the people, it is going to influence the way with which the people are going to travel and what mode of transport people are going to choose and how they are going to use the facility, right? So it's like if you place everything or all important facilities in the center of the town, and if you expect every single person in Bangalore city to go to the center of the town and satisfy their needs by shopping or by purchasing or for government offices or schools, colleges, etc. If everything was located in the center of the city, and if the entire Bangalore population was expected to go to the center of city for all these activities, then the center of the city would have got overcrowded. You would not have space to stand and walk. Forget about you taking your vehicles. So it would be over congested. That is where decentralization is going to play the role. So if you decentralize the facilities in different parts of the city, then the chances of people going to the same place at the same time would be avoided. So when you do this, then the chances of congestion and overcrowding of the transport facilities would be less. So what I'm trying to say here is you need to decide as a transport planner or a town planner to you need to plan it in a proper way that you don't congest the place by placing everything in the center of the city. Okay, so you have a proper pattern with which you need to place the things like the industrial areas and the employment hubs should be placed in the outskirts, so it would be easy for it would see to it that there would be no congestions and air pollution or water pollution taking place where the residential areas are located, right? So you should keep it as far as possible. Similarly, you cannot expect schools and colleges and universities to be placed in the center of the city. That would be very disturbing for the students who are trying to learn, because there would be a lot of traffic noise and other disturbances that would be happening. So these are some of the things that you need to think and plan properly when you're doing the planning, right? So land use and its characteristics are going to influence to very great extent in the way with which the trips are getting generated and attracted. The next factor is distance of the zone from the town center. Now, what this zone means is it is similar to the areas what we have in a city. So you have Pina as an area. In Bangalore city, you have Pina as an area. You have Rajajinagar as an area. You have Vijayanagar as an area. Now, these areas are meant for the local people to uh, understand the boundary between these different sections of the city. So the city would be divided into different smaller sections, which we call as area in a layman's language. But as a transport planner, we don't call it as an area, we call it as zones. So the entire region where the transport planning has to be carried out would be divided into number of small sections of different geometrical shapes depending upon my need. It might be a circular section or a rectangular section or a triangular section, whatever it is. Okay, so the entire region where the transport planning is supposed to be done would be divided into smaller sections, and these smaller sections would be called as sectors or zones. The further division of these zones, the smaller sections of zones, are called as subzones. So this region is also called as study area. The entire region where you are thinking of giving the transport planning is called as a study area, and this study area is divided into major sections called as sectors, and these sectors would be further divided into smaller sections called as zones, and the zones can be further divided into smaller sections called as subzones. Now the reason for dividing the entire study area into smaller sections is to reduce the complication of data collection and compiling and understanding. Okay, so these zones, they are not located always close to the center of the city. As I said, since the olden days, it's a general practice that the center of the city would be the marketplace, or the place where people are supposed to come and this thing purchase the goods, or there might be a recreational place, or important government bodies would be placed, or important offices would be placed, etc., etc. So it's an old practice, right? So distance of see, attached to these facilities would be smaller zones where the people would be residing. They would not be facing much problem in traveling to the center of the city. But problem is for those who are residing far away from the center of the city. So when you are staying far from the center of the city, your chances of traveling very frequently to the center of the city would be less. So what I'm trying to say here is, farther the town center, less would be the number of trips that would be likely to be generated by the people in the region. So if you are, imagine if you are staying in Bangalore city and you don't have any facility other than the center of the city, which is Majestic, then what will happen is, imagine you are staying in Kyarpuram and you will have to come to the center of the city for such long distance to purchase your groceries. Then, since it is difficult for you and it would be too hectic for you to travel right from Kyarpuram to Majestic, which is the center of the city, okay, just to purchase your groceries, then you would decide to come to this place once in a week or twice in a month, rather than coming daily or 3 to 4 times in a day. So for your convenience, you would decide traveling once in a week to this particular place. But if you are staying very near to the center of the city, for every small thing you would be going to the shops and you will be buying things. So your chances, when you are close to the center of the city, your chances of generating the trip would be more. But when you are staying far off from the center of the city, you generating the trips would be less. So this is what it means. Next is accessibility to public transport system and its efficiency. Now, public transport might be available, but its accessibility and its efficiency plays a very important role. So again, imagine you are staying in the outskirts of the city and you would want to travel to the center of the town or center of the city, right? So from that particular place where you are staying, you have public transport like city buses, and you have just one bus coming every 1 hour. Okay, so you just have one bus, and when you have such a critical situation, you would be traveling very limitedly, isn't it? So the accessibility is in a way with which the facility is available to you and how far this particular facility is available from your house. If you are supposed to walk 3 kilometers to reach the bus stop, then along with that you have only one bus coming every hour, then it would be a very critical situation for you. You will have to plan the things very properly. Under such circumstance, you would not expect to travel 10 times in a day. Once in a day is um, enough, isn't it? So if you are having difficulty to access the public transport, and if it is far off from your place, then the number of trips getting generated would get limited. Along with that, efficiency plays a very important role. If the public transport is overcrowded, and if it is not in a good condition, then you would get demotivated to travel again, isn't it? So as an emergency, you will be hopping in and you will be finishing your work. But under these different circumstances, it would be very difficult for you to travel. You would be basically demotivated to travel. So accessibility to public transport system and its efficiency is going to influence a lot. Next is employment opportunities, floor space in industrial areas or shopping units or offices and shops, etc. Now what this means is, if you have a place like Electronic City in Bangalore city, where you have hundreds of companies, or you take into consideration Pina industrial area itself, there are hundreds of factories and companies. So when you have so many companies in a limited area, the chances of employment generation would be more. When people are getting employed, or when there is more attractions of employment in this region, there would be more chances of people traveling to this place very frequently, possibly almost on daily basis, right? So when there is more employment opportunities, then the chances of people generating their trips to reach this destination would be more. Similarly, floor space. If the area, or if the facility, infrastructure facility like a mall or something that sort, if there's a mall that is being constructed in Bangalore city, which is really very good, and you have very good floor space into it, it is not overcrowded, then you would be wanting to travel to such place, okay, very frequently with your family. But imagine the same mall gets overcrowded and you don't have space to stand and walk freely, then you would get demotivated to go to that place. So the crowd and the volume of people and vehicle in such infrastructure facility is going to influence the floor space, and floor space is again going to influence your trip making behavior, right? Similarly, you have offices or you have schools which is overcrowded, and you don't have space to park your vehicle there again, and you don't have proper free space to spend your entire day there, then obviously you would not be taking admission in such a college or university, or you would not want to go to such office at all. Okay, so these are some of the factors which influences the trip generation and attraction rates in a region. So the factors governing trip generation, the general factors governing trip generation and attraction rates includes income, vehicle ownership, family size and composition, land use characteristics, distance of the zone from the town center, accessibility to the public transport system and its efficiency, employment opportunities, floor space in industrial area, shopping units, offices, shops, etc. Right? So these are the factors that need to be kept in your mind, and these kind of questions can be asked in the examination for you to explain what would be the factors governing the trip generation and attraction rates. So you should be able to explain the things uh, in a proper way. Now, uh, when we talk about transport planning, as I said, there are certain predictions that need to be made. So, understanding the present situation, I would be wanting to predict what would be the future of the facilities that I am planning for. How would be the condition of the people after 10 years or 20 years or even 50 years, etc., etc. So um, I cannot be an astrologer where I can just look into all those astrological documents and then predict what would be the future. That's a different science, or that's a different thing. But we as transport planners will have to depend more on facts and figures and mathematical calculations. So statistics, which is an applied mathematics, uh, helps us or helps the transport planner, planner or planners to use certain statistical techniques to predict the possible future about what would be the condition related to transport facilities in future, looking into the present scenario and past scenario. So past and present and its analysis would help you to predict the possible future, and that is going to influence your planning directly or indirectly, right? So there are certain techniques, as I said, statistical techniques, and these statistical techniques would be based on certain equations, prediction equations. So these prediction equations are also called as prediction models, right? So those prediction models will be having number of components into it, or the prediction equation will have number of components into it, and those components are called as variables and constants. Some variables are independent, some variables are dependent, and there might be multiplicative constants or additive constants, or even a weightage factor, right? So there are a number of components in these prediction equations. So these prediction equations or the prediction models, there are plenty of its type, but there are certain techniques in these equations again, and one such technique through those sort of equations is what we call as multiple linear regression analysis. So it's a method wherein you will be having a multiple linear regression equation, and that equation will be used to analyze the trip generation taking place in the region with respect to the data that you have collected in this first phase of transport planning, that is trip generation analysis. So in trip generation analysis, your intention is to calculate the total number of trip ends, and also to understand the trip making behavior, and to develop relationship between those trip making behaviors and purposes, such that you get a logical solution about the trip generation that is taking place in the region, right? So this multiple linear regression equation would have different components, as I said. So it's a well-known statistical method, to develop relationship between two types of variables, which we call as dependent variables and independent variables. So in transport planning process, the total number of trips or the number of trips that are getting generated would be a part of dependent variable, or falls into the category of dependent variable, right? So if you remember, in the previous class I had given you an example of a quadratic equation, y is equal to mx plus c and so on. Here dependent variable is that y. Okay, so y is the total number of trips. So the total number of trips or just the number of trips falls under the category of dependent variables. Now there are certain independent variables, and these would be the x, value of x in the equation. Okay, so independent variables are various measurable factors which influences the trip generation process. It might be in the form of land use characteristics, or x can be socioeconomic characteristics, x can be the educational characteristics, or the household characteristics, etc., etc. So those can be x values. Okay, now uh, this multiple linear regression equation and its analysis is used to know the future value of the trips. Okay, just to know the future number of trips that might be taking place in the future, you would be using this sort of equation. Now a general form of equation is being shown here, right? So yp is equal to a1 x1 plus a2 x2 plus a3 x3 so on till an xn plus u, where this yp is the number of trips for a specified purpose p. So purposes can be individual purpose. Now I might be, this entire equation might be just for education. So this P or the purpose for which I am doing this analysis might be just education. You cannot have all the purposes put in one single equation. It would be very complicated, right? So you're trying to solve problems one by one, and you might be solving a problem related to transportation facilities for educational purpose. So that purpose is this P, and Y is what we call as dependent variable. So Y is a dependent variable for educational purpose, which is equal to a1 x1 plus a2 x2 and so on, where this xn, or see these are the different components of the multiple linear regression equation, as I said. Okay, but let me just take this generalized component an xn. Xn is an independent variable related to either land use characteristics, or it might be related to educational purpose, or it might be related to employment, anything, right? So xn is the independent variable relating to the purposes for which we have framed this equation. An is the coefficient of this independent variable. See, this is yp is a dependent variable and xn is an independent variable, and an is the constant of this independent variable in the entire linear equation. Okay, so x1 is an independent variable, x2 is an independent variable, x3 is an independent variable, a1 a2 a3 etc are constants of these x1 x2 x3 etc, right? And let me tell you that this x1 and x2 are not dependent on each other, they work independently. Is that clear? And at the end you have this u. U is called as the disturbance term, right? Or it is just a constant that is independent of any of these independent variables. Okay, it's a constant. Now this constant is called as the disturbance term, representing the portion of this yp which is not been explained by any of these independent variables. Okay, so this is how a generalized multiple linear regression equation would look like. Now this multiple linear regression equation is not just limited to transport planning, it is used in almost everything. Suppose you are in 8th sem now, you are in 8th semester and you would be working on your group project or final year project, wherein you might be working on materials, say cement concrete related studies, and you would be doing certain number of tests, and after getting the data from those tests, you would be predicting what would be the possible change in its properties, that is concrete's property, if the variation in those other additives are going to change. So that's a prediction model that you would be developing, right? So that is similar to this multiple linear regression equation also. So multiple linear regression equation is not just employed in transport planning, it is used in almost everything, right? So this is what is about multiple linear regression analysis. There are some typical examples which we have for multiple linear regression equation. It includes some of these, like for example, in some place in Toronto, this study was made where this is YP. Okay, so the total number of trips generated at home on an average weekday would be equal to 0.318 times of population of 5 years and older plus 0.458 times of number of households and so on. So in this equation, this is yp, this is a1, a2, a3, x1, x2, x3. So to get these x1, x2, x3s, you will have to do a lot of survey, understand the present situation by doing an extensive inventory to collect information from people for days and months together. That would be compiled and you would be getting the value of x1, x2, x3, right? Similarly, this is one another equation. So there are plenty of such equations which which we can take into consideration to do the planning process. So this was about multiple linear regression analysis. So does anyone have any doubt?